Alright, Bob Dylan, Song by Song, Installment 3, Girl from the North Country. And this is not just a great song, but a great example of how Dylan transforms source material into something new. The other thing it does really well is show, just like with Blown in the Wind, how intricate the wordplay can be in the craftsmanship, even when the words are very sparse, unlike his later songs that get real wordy. But let's take a step back, really far back, to medieval England, and this town here of Scarborough, in Yorkshire, because that was the site of a famous fair, Scarborough Fair. There's a Renaissance festival near where I live every year called Scarborough Fair, here on the other side of the Atlantic. So it had a lasting cultural imprint and was celebrated in song and ancient ballads. Well, skip forward to the 1960s, where a version of it becomes popular in the folk revival. Now, Dylan learned this song when he was over in England, appropriately enough, from the same source as these guys. This was English singer Martin Carthy. Simon and Garfunkel did an incredible version of it, which became part of the Graduate soundtrack. But they did it straight, essentially, right? They basically did the song, they made it their own, but it was in the traditional folk vein. And they came along in Dylan's wake. So, just circling back to Dylan's actual song, what makes it, in part, I think, so amazing is how he transformed it and how he used it. And that is the word, right? Used. Like he's kind of ruthless in taking what's useful for what he wants to create. And that's how you go from the England of centuries ago to the America of the 20th century and Bob Dylan's upbringing. And it's not just a change in place and time either, not at all. You have a few lines from the original, just a couple. You have the overall conceit, which is that one person is asking another about a former lover, right, which is kind of interesting, right? Instead of a love song, the man to the woman or whatnot, there's this intermediary, it keeps that, and not much else. Because in the original, or its many variations, you didn't have a man pining for his lost love, you had him challenging her, which was really cool and interesting, but it's not what Dylan does here at all. He turns it into a plaintive love song, right? So unrequited love or lost love. And instead of asking the third party to challenge the woman, Dylan asks him to do things for her that he can't do himself. So even though Girl from the North Country could never have been written without the existence of Scarborough Fair, Dylan, who's acutely aware of that, feels no fealty whatsoever to the original intent of the song. So picture Dylan growing up here, what you see here in this visual, and at that time, and take into account kind of the globetrotting aspect of this song. You've got from, England to him listening to music and all kinds of traditional country ballad love songs in a place like this, and then eventually, of course, ending up in Greenwich Village, New York, and falling in love. What an amazing picture, by the way. I think it's even better than the one on the cover of the Freewheelin'. But he's in love and falls out of love, goes through all those trials and tribulations, and writes a lovesick song. The journey even continues because one interpretation of the song is that this is based on him missing his girlfriend in Italy. But in its very Dylan-esque way, he isn't too literal, so the girl in the song is the girl from the North Country, which seems evocative of where he grew up, actually, and not where he is in this picture here. And that's one of the things at the heart of his songwriting that makes it so mysterious and great, I think, is a lot of other fantastic songwriters would have approached, material like Scarborough Fair by doing a cover of it, or maybe updating the time and the place, that kind of thing. Things that we could maybe predict. This is something else altogether. So in the coffee houses like this, he's hearing faithful renditions of all kinds of songs, but he completely breaks the mold, not just with this song, but on this album, The Freewheelin'. Bob Dylan, he did it with the first song on the album, Blowin' in the Wind, which also takes just part of a traditional song, a Negro spiritual, and turns it into something entirely different, but yet echoic of the original, because it was largely inspired by the African-American struggle of the time. So it's a brave new world for the singer-songwriter genre, which he's in the process of inventing. But it's probably time we got to the song itself, because it's a great one. It's been covered by countless iconic singers, of course. Do yourself a favor, though, and listen to the impromptu in a pub version by the great Liam Clancy that I'll have linked in the video comments. Real quickly, I just want to touch on his playing, his guitar playing, because that's the instrument he's playing in the song. I'm in no position to judge it or anybody else's, but I do know it's respected, I would say, and he's considered on these first two albums as an accomplished acoustic guitar player. I'm not saying he belongs on the list of greatest acoustic guitar players, but you will find specific performances from these early albums listed when you see greatest acoustic, individual performances. Which is basically just to say that his playing can be underrated because of the focus on the words, a focus that I'm going to continue in these videos. So here we go. Great opening line. It echoes the traditional ballad's first line, but now it's about traveling in the North Country Fair. And you can have all kinds of fun with the word fair because Dylan loves when a word is ambiguous as heard, meaning it can be heard as more than one thing. So, in other words, you hear the word fair without context. It could be fair as in, a county fair. It could be fair as in beautiful, etc., etc. And oftentimes he'll tap into older meanings of words like that when he plays this game. So instead of if you're traveling to Scarborough Fair, which is very specific, well, if you're traveling in the North Country Fair, it could be beautiful countryside, right? The North Country Fair, but it could also be an actual event, a fair, as in Scarborough Fair. And it gets even better because one of the archaic definitions for fair, for one of the spellings of it, is a beautiful woman, which is what the song is about. And then on top of that, one of the other definitions for one of the spellings is travel or traveling. And that's perfect because it starts off by asking if you're traveling. Let's look at other parts of this first stanza. Well, if you're traveling in the North Country Fair, so traveling in, right? If you're traveling to, then you wouldn't have an internal rhyme. And if it was traveling, it wouldn't work as well either. So traveling in. Second line, where the winds hit heavy. It's like WWHH, where the winds hit heavy. So you have that kind of internal rolling alliteration. But it's also symmetrical, 2 and 2, and you see that a lot in his songs in one line, 2 and 2, 3 and 3, that kind of thing. The second two lines are from the original ancient ballad, so he's got to rhyme something with mine, and this is a great example of something he likes to do as well. Borderline is a big word. It matches with love of mine, right? So you have on the borderline a true love of mine. Instead of, could have ended with mine in any number of ways, and it wouldn't have that rhythmic matching to the larger word above. So, for instance, if it had been where the winds hit heavy on the state line, that would work. Probably nobody would have questioned it, right? Hit heavy on the state line, da-da-da-da-da, true love of mine. But using borderline is better because you get that three-syllable symmetry. I would even say that you see the same technique twice in the subsequent stanza. So you can see snowflakes storm juxtaposed with coat so warm. Well, if it was snow falls or snowstorms compared to coat so warm, it would still rhyme, sound great, but it wouldn't be as good, as appropriate. And you can see the same thing with lines 2 to 4. Summer ends, howlin' winds. Well, if it was summer ends versus cold winds, then you just don't get that, but it would still work. What else do I like in here? Sticking to that second line, rivers freeze. Internal rhyme there, even though it's not the same letter, right? But rivers, kind of a Z sound, rivers freeze. So it's way better than lakes freeze, which again would work just fine. And then river has another advantage because river and summer also have an internal rhyme. I probably should have said assonance instead of rhyming for some of that, but you get the point. And we're not done with the word rivers because rivers ends. That works better than river and then ends, right? You might as well have them both be plural and end in S. So rivers really connects to freeze, summer, and ends. Really all of the words, not counting and, in the rest of the line. So there are all these connections, and there's just always more to find. So if you look at like the top two parts, which is what we're looking at right now, the two stanzas, it's, well, if you're traveling. Well, the corresponding line, that's the first line there. The first line of the next part is, well, if you. So again, it's a very similar, and it's well if, where the, well if, when the. And that's the game. It's not the only way to appreciate his music. You don't have to do this at all or care or, think it's clever or anything else. But you really can't just kind of look anywhere else. So, if you go when the snowflakes fall, so you go and snow, again, have that kind of connection. Whereas if you come when the snowflakes storm, it wouldn't be the same thing, right? If you arrive, if you, etc., etc. I guess I should really stop when it comes to those two parts, because we could keep going. So instead, let's take a break from the nerd word stuff and point out that this song has two definitive versions by its creator, which is kind of unusual, right? So years after the freewheelin', Dylan got to do this song with one of his heroes, Johnny Cash. And you can see the picture here along with the record's producer, and Dylan's writing, by the way. This duet came out on Nashville Skyline, of course. It was also a hit. It's funny, Roseanne Cash tells a story about, I think she was in high school at the time, and she just became like the instant queen of cool because her dad did a song with Bob Dylan. Kind of funny since her dad was, Johnny Cash. Would have thought she'd already been there. Cash, of course, had a tremendous amount of admiration for Dylan, and just their relationship is one of the coolest things in rock and roll history, probably. This is when they were on his TV show famously, and the song, of course, fits Cash like a glove, right? It's kind of a country ballad. It's about lost love. And another really unique thing about their collaboration is it might be the only, like, top-tier level icon duet that's improvised on a record. Boy, that was tough to get through. Let me try again. So you've got two top-tier artists, like, American music icons of the highest order. This is on an official release, right, on a record, and they're improvising their way through the song, which I think makes it even better, and if you listen to it, you'll know what I mean. There's probably an analogous case somewhere in the annals of, like, American pop rock history, but I'm not sure if there is. Two more cool things about the Nashville connection. One, Dylan's voice is so different on the second version of this song, the one recorded in Nashville, that he doesn't even sound like the same person as the kind of reedy voiced folk singer from the original. And also, speaking of Nashville connection, that Nashville is one more place to add to our list then. So this song just takes you all over the place, from, England to the Iron Range in Minnesota to Greenwich Village to Italy to Nashville. And back to the lyrics, because I can't get enough of that. I'll try to be brief here and just highlight some of the things I really like from the rest of the song. Take a look at that top line there. It's got this kind of 3x3 structure, similar to the 2x2 that we talked about, with the two W sounds and then two H's. Where winds hit heavy, now this time it's please, got that E sound, please see for me, her hair hangs, right? So kind of E-E-E-H-H-H. I think I'll try to show a modicum of restraint and not delve into details on that stanza. In fact, we'll just stop there. And we'll go to the next one, the second to last, because it's the last original one. The very last one is the first one, from the beginning of the song, so it comes full circle, of course. But in this one, which begins, I'm a-wonderin', and that's a good verb to use because wonderin' rhymes with travelin', and they have the, the rounded off ending there, kind of the missing G, and it just works better than any number of other alternatives, right? Does she remember me at all? Many times I've often prayed, etc., etc. Again, that would sound fine, but this works even better. It's just got one more tie-in. But anyway, back to the stanza itself. It breaks from tradition and earlier in the song, right? It's got a very typical rhyming structure, A, B, A, B. This breaks from that, and this doesn't do that. The other thing it does in terms of something new is it kind of goes to the first person, so he's addressing this third party the entire song before and talking about the she, the woman of the song. I'm a-wonderin'. This completely breaks that, and he's looking internally and kind of narrating. So the fact that he's using a bridge is not revelatory. It's a very common feature in songs, but it's interesting to see how it actually breaks. I think it's a little bit more nuanced than in a lot of songs. The other thing about this, I love that last couplet, so we'll have to check on that. That'll be the last detail. Obviously, you can see the nice symmetry and contrasts, right? Because darkness, night, brightness, day, and it's basically the same sentence twice with just the pivotal parts replaced, and they're opposites, of course. So anyway, I just want to do this real quick. So, quote, the poem exploits another familiar notion of day and night according to Petrarchan love rhetoric. The presence and absence of the beloved lady are compared to the brightness of day and the darkness of night. A lovesick young man provides a central perspective, and the entire poem pivots around his confusing and confused relationship with Stella. So that was from a book called The Poetics of Repetition in English and Chinese Poetry, and I was referencing a sonnet from Philip Sidney's Astrophil and Stella, which was from the 16th century. And that's, I think, a fairly random coincidence, but it's just an example of the kind of interesting tidbits you'll pick up and learn if you dissect the Dylan song. You pick a phrase that you really like, you pull on that thread of the sweater, and you just don't know where it's going to take you. So, did he borrow that phrase from somewhere else? If not, it still is going to lead to a lot of usually interesting places. A great example, of course, would be the lifting he did from Confessions of a Yakuza. Maybe the words you're examining play into a larger poetic tradition, as in here, even if accidentally, and who knows if it is accidental or not, right? He was very well read and just absolutely loved poetry. Things like that. Girl from the North Country, in terms of official releases and his actual albums, this I guess you would call his first love song, and it's a great one. Particularly interesting as an example of, recycling something else and moving away from the source material. But it's also much more than just putting new words on an old tune or just taking an old song and updating the references, the time and place. I don't even know what to call the process exactly, but it works, and that's what counts. Thanks.